Okay, turn into some of the disrupting things that have been going on. Technology is certainly one of them. I was talking to you, Raina, on the phone a couple of days back, or last week, whenever it was, and you've had your own experiences with Uber and the taxi service. Tell us a little bit about it, and you can tell us too a little bit about who's Uber and why it is so important around the world, actually.
I don't guess, is Uber not?
It's not an issue here, no.
Okay. So we have, of course, we have a large contingent of our staff out in the world, nationally and internationally, marketing and driving sales for Las Vegas. And what they kept coming back with over the last few years is, wow, when we go to these other cities, we don't have to take a taxi cab. We can do this little app on our phone, Uber or Lyft. There's a few others, but Uber being the largest, Lyft right behind them. And you have all your information in there. You tap the app, say, come pick me up. This nice car driven by a private person who's not associated with any authority or government agency comes, picks you up. You know what your fare is going to be. He takes you there. There's no cash exchange. You get out of the car and walk away. And it's there's different levels from sedans to larger vehicles to limos, and they were all bragging. And in our state, Nevada, it was not legal. And the Taxi Cab Authority is a very strong contingent, and over the last year and a half fought extremely hard, and Uber brought a legal battle about open competition. They said, whether you agree with their argument or not, they said they were actually not a transportation entity, they were a technology entity. It was an app that simply linked you with someone who was providing the service. Now, they vet the people who are providing the service, and they mandate that they have insurance, and they mandate that they have background checks, and they mandate all these things for the protection of the consumer and the rider, but yet they say they're not a transport company. But based on really demand from our visitors, because our visitors across the world, because they're overseas, they're in Europe, they said, when we get there, we want it. So at some point, the destination has to say, this is what the consumer wants, we have to change what we're doing, or yet it's another barrier driving them away, somewhat like an unfriendly, airport staff. So we've got to be open-minded, we've got to break down expectations that this is the way we've always done it, and sometimes those are ingrained in government bureaucracy, and so we've got to fight the fight to challenge that, because no matter how it came out, we had to make it work. Once they got through the state legislature that said Uber is allowed to legally operate in Nevada, Uber had to challenge the county that Las Vegas sits in, because the county goes, well, they don't have permits, and they don't have a license, so they still can't operate. So then they had to go through that legal battle. They got through that legal battle, and then the airport said, well, they can't come onto airport property because the taxi cabs pay a fee to come on, and they don't. So there was yet another battle. And at some point, it made us look stupid. At some point, we just had to say, this is the wave of the future. This is what the consumer is demanding. Let's be honest, everybody who was fighting it, when they flew to another destination on business, they were Ubering. So, we have to stop, we have to get out of our own way and move forward.
Well, I think the positive thing is that essentially what it's done is made everybody else realize how they have to rise to the challenge and improve their service standards. So, so essentially that's what's happening. Even the black cabs in London, of which there are still 50,000, still going for it. But everybody's realized that service standards have to come up.
So if the taxi cab wants to hold on to that ridership, then they need to clean up the taxis, they need to modernize them, they need to be on time, they have to be willing to pick up when they're called, they have to rise to the level of standards of service, and then Uber is not as much of a threat. But if Uber is doing it better than you,
you got to follow,
And I think the lesson
sorry, go ahead. It's a little bit similar with Airbnb.
Well,
because that's exactly, it's a similar thing. So for us as hotels, and then maybe on the luxury end, it's not as much as a threat. But I think eventually, I think it will grow there too. And it started in St. Bart's a little bit, because you get some higher-end villas that are on there. But at the same time, we as hoteliers, we just have to make sure that we do a better job.
Well, it's here.
And it's here, and it's here to stay.
Talking to the director about it, and there are more properties here quietly doing it, and it's what do you do?
We started surveying our audience about Airbnb in particular in the last year, essentially, and I described sort of the demographic of our audience. 65% of them told us that they either have already used Airbnb or have plans to in the coming year. Of those who had already used it, 94% of them said that they had had a positive experience. And these are high-end travelers. So I mean, I think the lesson that I take away from Uber and from Airbnb and from some of the other players that are doing this kind of thing. I mean, there's now an Uber for private planes, several of them actually, where you can share a private plane with someone else. Is really the power that technology has to very quickly meet an unmet consumer need and disrupt a business. Airbnb is working not because hotels are doing a bad job, but because maybe the hotels, especially in certain markets, weren't meeting certain needs that the consumer had, certain things that they wanted to experience or feel in those places. And when you think about Uber, I mean, Uber wasn't even around. Was it around 5 years ago?
No.
Today they operate in 60 countries.
Yeah,
I mean,
the technology has progressed so fast. If we're not willing to evolve at the speed technology is evolving, you're going to fall behind.
Yeah.
You talked about the Uber with the aircraft. We just had a major convention every January. We have a major consumer electronics show that's an international show, 170,000 people. And Uber partnered with Maverick Helicopter will drop you at the convention center. So because parking
Isn't that disruptive?
You have to park an hour to 2 hours before you need to be at the show because there's so many people trying to get in one facility. Yeah. And because I have my Uber app, I got the email saying you need to get to the convention center, we'll drop you right there. And I have to drive in as an employee, and I really wished I could have taken advantage of that.
Yeah. That was quite remarkable as well at ILTM this year in Cannes. So how many hoteliers actually had booked Airbnb versus the hotel rooms?
Yeah.
So,
switching to a little bit of a difficult topic, this issue of terrorism. Since the Paris incident and San Bernardino to some extent, and before that Sinai, have we seen any diminution in travel or excessive concern about it? Or is it potentially, if something happens in, God forbid, New York or someplace?
I think there are different reactions.
Yeah.
Some people will say, okay, I'm not going to travel anymore. Other people will say, well, it cannot affect our lives, so we have to go and travel. So I think you have basically the two fronts.
Do you think that
911
911 in some way has helped to shape the thinking in terms of, look, we've been there before, we had to deal with it and we know how we dealt with it then, and we're not going to allow people to disrupt their lives. And
we see that the bounce back time is much shorter than it used to be. Like it just keeps getting shorter, essentially. There is an impact whenever something happens. It also
is resilient.
Yeah, we also see that what will happen a lot of times is people they might shift their plans, but they won't cancel them necessarily. Yeah. So they might say, well, maybe I'm not going to go to Paris next week like I was supposed to. Although in fact we saw a lot of people who were still going immediately after as a gesture of support as well. But
defiance.
But sometimes you'll see people say, well, okay, we'll move from Kenya to Tanzania or something, as opposed to saying we're not going to go on safari.
As I open with, really, though, I mean, in terms of if I put a sort of TUI group hat on and look at the Eastern Med effect, and obviously we had Tunisia, we've had Egypt, there's been massive change in terms of where tourists are going, aside from Russians going to Turkey and such like. So although people are more resilient, some of the larger locations are definitely suffering for sure. Yeah. The Eastern Med has gone very quiet for Turkey and Greece, and everybody's turning their attentions to the Western Med. So suddenly, from a TUI perspective, we're flying aeroplanes into Portugal versus Dalaman in Turkey and such like. So there is a move in terms of the product offering. In some ways, the tour operators tend to steer that movement. It's not necessarily the individual who doesn't want to book that particular area.
I'm going to we're going to open up in a couple of minutes for questions. I'm going to add, finally, Cuba as a potential disruptor. The Caribbean, we all of those of us who are in tourism, for all the time that I've been involved in some shape or form, we have this love fair, I should say, relationship with Cuba. We want them to thrive, but when it comes to tourism, we wonder what's going to happen. What's going on in Cuba? What are you guys hearing at your level, for example? I know, Peter, are you looking at Cuba to do things, and what's going on? Why is it so interesting? Needless to say, I have to say the issue the Premier talked about yesterday, if every day you pick up the papers or you read something from Skift or somebody online, another plane, another airline is signing an agreement and we're flying into Cuba. So
yeah,
something must be going on.
The last 12 months has been sizable change.
Yeah.
Let's not kid ourselves. Americans have been going to Cuba for a long time.
Yeah.
In fact, I've seen more Americans in Havana than many other nationalities. So you know, it's opening up, and I think the leniency that's being offered now by President Obama in terms of the travel on December the 17th, travel restrictions were further lifted. The 12 criteria that you have to meet, one of them being people to people, is very easily met. You don't even need a license. Mm-hmm. So folks are going to take an interest. I mean, it's a big landmass just south of North America. Mm-hmm. And it's got some great beaches, and it's been open to Europe and the UK for a long period of time, and the US knows about it. From our perspective, we've been there, by the way, so I know it very well. From our perspective, it's got a cruising ground to the south, Cayo Largo, the Garden of the Queen and such like, but it's nowhere near what is here in the BVIs from a yachting tourism perspective. And it will take a long time for it to be built infrastructure-wise to even come close. Mm-hmm. So the land-based tourism, however, it's been very strong from Europe. TUI flies airplanes into Cuba. It's actually stopped and it's now started again. So it's opening up to North America. Mm-hmm. The big change is everybody will want to go and take a look. Yeah. So there's going to be a downturn.
I think it's the novelty.
Yeah, for sure.
The people who weren't comfortable, as you said, there have been Americans going there for a number of years, but they weren't your normal traveler, your routine traveler, and now those travelers are going to go, well, that sounds exciting to try.
It will be, but the big issue is security, because I think folks have still got to overcome the fact that it's what it is in terms of the way the country is run. And the security element still to North America will be a piece in their minds to say, do I really want to go there yet until...
Yeah. We started asking our audience as well about Cuba, and in our last iteration of this survey, 82% of them said that they had an interest in going, but only 5% said that they were planning to go in the next year. So I think what you see is that it's still aspirational. It's still. I think there are a lot of people, particularly those who are used to a certain kind of infrastructure, a certain kind of comfort, who are saying, "I'm going to wait until more happens there." Yeah. I mean, now that said, we introduced a new travel product last year called Travel + Leisure Journeys, and Cuba is our #1 seller. So, there's definitely interest for sure, but I don't think it's cannibalizing on a lot of the more traditional destinations in the region, because I think your traditional customer isn't the one who's necessarily at the leading edge of what's going on in tourism in Cuba right now.
Yeah. My final question I want to ask is about the announcement the Premier made yesterday. I think, Peter, you certainly commented about it earlier on. Martin, you lived with us, and in my earlier tour of duty as tourism chairman, we got a call every day. What's going on with the flights and planes and challenges? What do you think this decision is going to mean for the BVI to have direct flights from Miami to?
It will be huge. Yeah. So, we've been trying to get some things off the ground a few years ago. I think actually quite consistently. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the biggest request and the biggest demand, and I had some top travel agents that came down. Again, every time when we address the issue, and for Symbarge it's the same, because we always have that little hub. Everybody says it's the direct flight, the direct flight, the direct flight, and the direct flight.
I think it's going to be huge. Our audience tells us all the time, direct flight, same thing. I was just looking at at the survey that we do again before getting on the stage, and I was noticing that when we ask people, in the Caribbean region in particular, we say, where do you typically go? And then we ask them, where are you planning on going in the coming year? And those two lists look very, very similar to each other, but one of the things that we've seen in the last 2 years in particular is that destinations like Turks and St. Lucia that have improved their direct airlift into the destination have come up in those rankings. And so I think it'll be a really big deal.
I think the point that was raised this morning was, the destination was attractive because it was more difficult to get to. Is definitely gone now. People want point to point. They want seamless travel. They want code share. They want to use air miles. They don't want to be on small airplanes because they can't convince their other half to get on. Simply put, this is absolutely a game changer. I mean, I'm expecting, of course, that there's a lot of details to be worked out, obviously. Yeah. But it needs to be a seamless customer journey from the destination to this destination. And that includes, and it was good news this morning that there were conversations about immigration and customs, because that is a big part of the element of the service level. And I'm hoping that those two pieces of paper will become one or less than one. Because that's an awful lot of information that everybody's filling out, and I'm not sure what's being done with it. Although I would like the database if it's available.
Well, I'm sure we can find a way to sell it to you.
I think it'll be huge for the West Coast. Huge for the West Coast.
That's an interesting point, actually. You're right.
That extra, if it takes 3 flights or 4 flights to get somewhere instead of just 2, because the West Coast, there's plenty of nonstop flights to Miami, and then a nonstop flight here
into the BVI.
It's 2, and that will just open up the psychology of so many West Coast travelers. A whole new world of marketing opportunity.
And we've always had traditionally a very strong California market in particular, and this really, you're absolutely right, is now going to give us a nice shot in the arm, I want to believe, because prior to now people tended to even take red eyes to New York and do all kinds of things to get here, and hopefully that's no longer an issue. Okay, can we switch from me to the audience in terms of potential questions that I have? Dawn? Is she around now?
I am around. This question the moderator could answer.
To the best
also,
I can.
to the best of your ability, of course, but it's for the panelists. With Cuba opening its doors to the U.S., there will be obviously some threats and I think some opportunities. Like the cruise lines, I'm sure they would love to get in there, and they might drop some ports. It's a good thing that we will now have direct flights several times a week, because in my mind, I am thinking that the opportunity is that our government could probably, and the tourist industry could probably partner with Cuba, so that, when I say partner with Cuba, get in there and promote the BVI and so forth, so that there is a lap where people can now travel to Cuba, but involved. For instance, if we were in Turks and Caicos or Cayman, it's easy for a travel agent to route that in the Cuba trip. So I'm thinking, and my question is to you guys, what do you think the BVI government long-term and short-term strategies should be to combat the obvious threats, because people will be curious, because we all know that Cuba is in a time zone. It's at a standstill. So people are going to go and see the infrastructure and so forth. So we will lose people who would normally come to the Caribbean. What short-term and long-term plans will the BVI government, do you think, that we should do to combat that and also take opportunities on that? I hope it's not a stupid question, but...
No, it's not. If I may take a stab at it quickly, I know that at a regional level, that is one of the approaches, doing two-center twinning with Cuba into the region in terms of taking advantage of the huge share of voice that is going to be directed at Cuba. To be honest with you, from where I sit, in terms of the biggest way we could deal with the issue of the potential issue of Cuba opening up, the Premier announced it yesterday, in a very serious way. If you can't get your people to your destination, it's very difficult to have a destination. Let's be frank about it. And I think that helps. The other part of it that we have to do is the customers that we have that tends to repeat and come to us regularly on a year-round basis, we need to make sure we are doing whatever we can, that personalization. We need to make sure we're taking care of them. And that means really taking care of them. Even the immigration matters we discussed this morning, but it goes beyond that. All of us must take care of our visitors and be appreciative of them. I go walking from where I live down the hill and I see them every day. I remember one night I was walking, going home late, and actually a couple of visitors stopped. They didn't know me from the chairman of the tourist board or a criminal just came out of jail and said, "Can I give you a ride up the hill?" What does that say? It says that people are comfortable. Yeah. We have to take care of our visitors. And if we take care of our visitors, trust me, they will come back. And that burden isn't just us on the tourist board. Yes, we are the point of despair, but it's a collective thing in the community, from the premier down to taxi driver. And if we do it, we'll be fine. But any other thoughts you guys might have?
I mean, I would also add that from my perspective, I think at least right now, for the U.S. traveler, Cuba is not a replacement for what they traditionally come to the Caribbean for. They're going to have a cultural experience. I don't think the American market, at least at this point, is looking at Cuba as a place to like go to the beach and relax. They're going to Cuba because they want to experience this society in transition. And that's what's really driving them. So I think at least right now, I think it will mature and will change into a more competitive market. But right now, I think it's first of all, I think it's a different kind of person who maybe doesn't even traditionally come to the region at all, who wants to go there. And then I think it's an addition or it's a different kind of trip for now.
I would say as it matures, that you get ahead of the game. And so I would agree with Nathan that right now it's not a threat. It's an experience that maybe their neighbor wouldn't do that they want to be able to say they did do and see that society and change. But I think the longer it's open, there might be some progression where it starts a little bit of cannibalization, and so you get out ahead of that, and that means partnering. That means if there are other destinations that make sense, that you call them up and say, we need to work together on this, and start contacting the cruise lines 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road and say, as new routes are developed, as new cruise routes are developed, we're all going to go to that cruise line together and say, this is what we think it should be. If you're going to incorporate Cuba, we all want to be on that route. And there's strength in numbers, and you do that together and prove to the cruise lines now. You start building the case now, so that because people, it's like airlines, they take years before they actually make a decision and put a new route in and put new airlift in. And so you start the conversation now, and it may seem preliminary and it may not come to fruition for 5 to 10 years, but you've started the conversation.
Yeah, I think I agree with Russell in terms of the net effect of Cuba and its attractiveness to go and have a look is going to be overcome by the direct flight. So we're going to see an improvement overall. We're just going to make sure that you know, the service levels attached to that program as well.
Okay, next question. Thank you. Next question.
Okay, I have the mic here. Looking at BVI, you have a two economic pillar economy and very strong ones, especially when you go into the tourism, you have the yachting industry. Both of the sectors are very high end. My question to the panel, because I do realize there's a move toward cruise tourism, how does it mesh? Because you're actually going to mass tourism, which oftentimes is not a good marriage. How does it mesh? What is your take on it? Is it something good to continue stimulating these big cruises, or should you have stayed more towards putting the money towards yachting?
Let me attempt to answer that. It's an appropriate question, actually. To me, at the end of the day, it's going to get down to the issue of management. How do we manage all of visitors, whether they're on the water, on the land, cruise, or whatever, so that they all have an experience that is one that they want to go back and tell others about. And that means that, particularly on the cruise side, while we've seen some movement on that, there's a lot of things we need to do, particularly as it relates to where those visitors can go. The whole area of historical sites is an area, particularly on not this island, on Tortola, is a real area of opportunity that we need to really invest in, develop, so that our visitors, those visitors, can find other places to go. We are, as a government, I know we are trying to do some additional work in the area of Brandywine Bay, but we are a little bit behind that, to be honest with you, and we need to do more work in that regard. But at the end of the day, we have to manage our visitor experience in all areas, whether it's the yachting side, the land side. And if to the extent that we can do that successfully, we will be fine. But it's a hands-on responsibility. If I sit here and say something else, I will be being dishonest. We have to actively manage it.
Is it a good idea? Not so much how
Yeah.
you welcome these big cruises. That's really the question.
Yeah.
Because it usually kills the hype.
Yeah.
Just talking from experience.
I think that decision was made for us some time ago when we built the cruise dock. The reality is that it's here, and it's a growing part of tourism that the burden is on us to manage it. We have to manage it. Otherwise, it will get out of whack. And right now it's not. It's funny, you might, if you go back and look at 03, 07, well, now we probably have 500,000 visitors. Actually, in 03 or 07, the numbers were much higher. The challenge that we face as a country is to put in the infrastructure to make sure that we are managing those visitors and that the experience is such. I mean, people look at what's happening at the cruise ship dock and say, well, you know, the rest of Rotong is going to die. I don't see it that way. If we were to fix Main Street like Old San Juan, I'm always dreaming, right? You can juxtaposition Old San Juan or Main Street with the cruise dock. And fortunately, the government has put in that road behind, and the boardwalk is going to go. It's a matter of distributing the people. But it's for us, we've got to manage it. Just like how we're doing in financial services, we've got to manage it. Yes, sorry.
Yes, Lorna?
I wouldn't want us to
miss
you. You know.
Thanks. I wanted Martin's take on it.
Sure.
Having worked in the BVI and now working in St. Bart's, and I want to put it in context. You mentioned a cruise ship. I was on a cruise ship last month. I live in the BVI. I went to St. Bart's, got off the cruise ship, went into St. Bart's, and you saw the super yachts tied up and the narrow streets, the lovely wooden traditional houses. Martin talked about the 70 restaurants. There's a sleekness and a charm about St. Bart's. We talk about being high-end. Are we really high-end?
That's a very blunt
Honestly,
question.
sorry.
Martin, I think I want to put to you initially.
Yes, Martin, you are very much on the spot with that one.
I wouldn't jump in and try to.
There are certain things that, there's some things are shifting a little bit already. So, because now with the opening here of the super yachts, and so you kind of get more and more super yachts. I think as well what I've heard recently is that the villa product is coming up here. So you have the high-end villa product, and more. What has to follow is the infrastructure that's behind it, you know. But I think St. Bart's is very unique, so it kind of has been like this. Well, actually, tourism started up there really in the 80s, but it has developed completely differently. And to get there, it has to come from within.
It has to.
It has to come from within. So it is within, so by providing the service levels, by understanding what the need of the customer is, and then you can work your way up, and you can get it. Because I think a lot of elements here you actually have.
Okay. I want to follow on the lady's question and your response in terms of management. I was at the Bats last week. And of course, whenever I have visitors, I take them to the Bats. And it's one of the unique BVI experiences. And I don't think you can get it anywhere else in the world. But it was totally diminished by the number of cruise ship passengers that were coming through on the bats. Like at one point, we had to stop, and there were 120 people, the guide said she had behind of her. So how are we going to manage the bats with the cruise ship passengers and still make it a unique BVI experience?
The hard reality is that, and you put it quite well, we've got to recognize the carrying capacity of our facilities. And you have to manage the amount of people that can go there in a period of time so that the experience at the end of the day is one that, again, that they can enjoy. And that burden is on us. And it will cause some new elements to creep in, but we have to do it. Because at the end of the day, what we are selling is a visitor experience. And if the experience is such that it is not as wholesome as it should be, then it could become negative. If you look at the work that we are doing at the Tourist Board with the Disney Institute, and they're very, very, people think of the Disney Institute as Disney. It's really something separate in a lot of ways. They're very, very particular about the experience that their guests are going to get. And they don't allow us to fall asleep on it. They call Sharon more often than I, but they're constantly on our tails. You asked us to sign these agreements, we've signed the agreements. We want to make sure that the experience for our guests is going to be X, and they're willing to help us to do it. But the burden is going to be on us to manage it. And there's no shortcut to that. Having said that, it does mean, however, that we have to have other places for them to go, and there's no shortage of opportunities on Tortola. All the historical sites, I heard the Premier speaking about it. I even heard the leader of the opposition in the last House meeting talking about, and I hope when we go down to talk to him about Taunton Estate, he's friendly. But even he got up and talked about it. We have to incorporate those facilities so that our visitors can be distributed, and then we have to manage it. There is no other way around it, you know. Having said that, there are different segments in our tourism. The yachting side is a distributed mechanism. You know, it distributes revenue around the country to Jost Van Dyke and to Anegada and Virgin Gorda. It's the same thing with the cruise side. That also has its constituents and people who depend on it. But the burden is on us to manage it. That's the burden we have, and we just have to do it. Take it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm the chairman of the National Parks Trust. I know there's no more questions, but I just thought I should say something.
Sure.
One of the reasons the Deputy Premier, who was the Minister of Natural Resources, appointed me as the new chairman was to bridge what is happening at the cruise pier expansion to make more facilities in the BVI available. I think I have only been there 2 months, but the process for the first quarter of this year is to finish all the visitor centers so that we can have a visitor center at the Copper Mine, Sage Mountain, the St. Philip's Anglican Church to try to move some of the traffic. We are currently working on the bats. I was very embarrassed to hear it, but it is the truth. A lot of the trails are diminished, and we have embarked on appointing someone to deal with that. We're also looking at the visitor experience. Some of the fees will probably increase so that we can limit the access there until we can get the right amount of people there. One of the issues is that wherever people travel, we believe that the bats is one of the best experiences that anyone can get anywhere. So we are trying to get that product up to the point where people will have that experience. It's something that I think everyone will see happening perhaps by the second quarter of this year. So a lot of what the complaints are, they're currently being addressed. The minister is about to pass more of the national parks over to the trust. And the National Parks Trust has been a very invisible part of this BVI. It is not going to be that way anymore. We are going to move all the historical sites into visibility, and we are going to make sure that our tourists have some place to go so that one area is not crowded. We have too much natural resources here to be having this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I do want to say just one final point. And those of us who are charged with the burden of looking after these issues on a daily basis, I do want to assure you that we have done the work that needs to be done. The things you hear me talk about in terms of historical sites and what needs to be done, there is a well thought through plan that the Premier's office has requested. It's on their desk, and we are waiting. Budgets are coming up. We trust that this year will be an active year to begin to fund some of the things to get them done. But it's not going to be a one-year thing. It's a multi-year thing. We are now in a period where, whether it's on tourism or financial services, we have to manage these things to make sure that the livelihood that we become accustomed to continues. The days when you can just sit back and say, it's okay, we've long passed that. I want to thank the panel for what was, I thought, a very good discussion.